They say the sun will rise tomorrow, but what if that promise was always a lie? What if this blazing eye in our sky, this giver of light, warmth, and time, is not a guardian, but a ticking bomb dressed in gold? We live under the illusion of eternity. We call it constant, but it is crumbling from within. The countdown has already begun. We just don't hear it. Not yet. But one day, perhaps far from now, or sooner than we think, the sun will falter. And when it does, everything we've ever known will vanish into the silence it leaves behind. Please like and subscribe, because this journey will change how you see our place in the universe. Prepare yourselves. We begin. For most of us, the sun is a symbol of everything we trust. It wakes us, warms us, feeds us. It glows above our childhood memories, crowns our weddings, burns over the battlefields of history, and watches quietly as we live and die. It feels permanent, but permanence is not truth. It is perception and illusion carved by the limits of human time. The sun has always been here, but not forever. It was born, it will die. In the deep machinery of the universe, even stars have expiration dates. The sun, our sun, is no different. It's already middle-aged. It has been burning for 4.6 billion years, and in perhaps 5 billion more, it will collapse, unravel, and become something unrecognizable. But the end doesn't arrive all at once. It whispers first. It changes in shadows and subtleties long before the light goes out. Right now, deep inside the sun, a storm is unfolding. A storm not of rain or thunder, but of nuclear fire. Every second, the sun fuses 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium, transforming matter into energy, in a process so violent we can barely understand it. It is this furious reaction that gives us sunlight, that makes plants grow, that lets us breathe, that fuels our entire ecosystem. But that fire is also the clock. The hydrogen the sun burns is not infinite. It is slowly running out, and when it's gone, the balance will shatter. Gravity, which has always threatened to crush the star inward, will gain the upper hand. The sun will respond in kind, expanding, bloating, flaring into something monstrous. And from that point on, nothing in this solar system will be safe. We call the sun stable, predictable, but that's only because we measure time in days and years. The sun operates in eons. Its pulse is measured in millions of centuries, and in its scale, we are like insects dancing briefly in its light, unaware that the ground beneath us is already shifting. It shines, but it is not steady. It glows, but it is not calm. It breathes, groans, balances, adjusts. Every second, there is tension between collapse and explosion, between gravity's pull inward and fusion's push outward. The sun exists in a delicate equilibrium, an unending tug of war that keeps it alive. But balance is not permanence, it is delay. The sun is not a being, but if it were, it would already know its fate, it would already feel its age, and maybe, in its quiet rumble, it is already trying to warn us. Not with words, but with heat, with light, with time. To the naked eye, the sun is simple, just a disk of golden light that hangs above us, unchanged from morning to evening, season to season, lifetime to lifetime. But that is a trick of scale, a lie told by distance. The truth is far more violent. Inside the sun is a cauldron of unimaginable energy. At its very heart, temperatures soar past 15 million degrees Celsius. Pressure builds to such staggering extremes that atoms lose all resistance, their nuclei forced together in a collision so intense it bends the rules of matter. This is nuclear fusion. This is where light is born. Hydrogen atoms fuse into helium. In that fusion, mass is lost, and in that loss, energy is set free, raw, radiant, relentless. That energy begins a journey outward, taking thousands, even millions of years to crawl from the sun's core to its surface. Only then does it erupt into space. racing at the speed of light across the vacuum, touching Earth just 8 minutes later. Every ray of sunshine that warms your skin is ancient. It began in a collision deep inside a star, long before your ancestors walked the Earth, before oceans had names, before time had meaning. And yet, for all this fury, the sun appears peaceful. That illusion, the calm disk overhead, is maintained by a delicate, ceaseless war between two opposing forces. Gravity pulls inward, trying to crush the star into itself. Fusion pushes outward, trying to tear it apart. The result is a fragile equilibrium, like a dancer balancing on the tip of a collapsing bridge. If fusion were to slow for even a moment, gravity would tighten its grip, compressing the core, raising its temperature, and reigniting fusion in a sudden burst. If fusion burned too hot, the sun would swell, cooling its core until the reaction eased. This rhythm of push and pull happens continuously, silently, every moment of every day. We see a glowing sphere. What we don't see is the battle. What we don't feel is the tension. Every second, the sun sacrifices nearly 4 million tons of itself to give us warmth. Imagine that. 4 million tons gone, every heartbeat. This is not sustainable. It was never meant to be. And yet, this destruction is what gave us life. It is the ultimate paradox. The sun burns itself to keep us alive, and in doing so, it accelerates its own death. The scale of this self-destruction is almost incomprehensible. Over 1 million Earths could fit inside the sun, and yet, even something so massive, so dominant, is still governed by laws it cannot escape. It is made of plasma, not solid, not liquid, not gas, but something more primordial. A state of matter so hot and energized that atoms break apart entirely. In this turbulent sea, magnetic fields twist and snap like rubber bands. Great arcs of plasma rise like solar tsunamis, sometimes erupting into space in what we call solar flares, fountains of fire, tens of thousands of kilometers high. These flares don't just light up the sky, they carry radiation and charged particles that stream across the solar system, brushing the planets, bombarding spacecraft, sometimes even disrupting satellites and power grids here on Earth. We call it space weather. But make no mistake, this is the sun's temper, briefly unleashed. And yet, these outbursts are not signs of chaos, they are part of the sun's nature. The turbulence on its surface, the sunspots, the flares, the solar winds are signs of its aging body, signs that deep inside, changes are brewing. Even now, as you read this, the solar wind is passing over you, an invisible stream of particles, moving at over 400 kilometers per second, brushing against our magnetic field. Most days, it goes unnoticed, but when it collides with Earth's upper atmosphere, it paints the skies with aurora's curtains of light that ripple and dance in green and violet and red. Beauty, born of violence, and still we call it calm. What we see when we look at the sun is not even the present. Light takes time to travel. The sun we see in the sky is already 8 minutes old. We are always seeing its past. And if it vanished right now, we wouldn't know until 8 minutes later. That's the distance between us. A short breath in cosmic time, yet still wide enough to separate us from the truth of what it island. It is a memory when it reaches us, a story already finished. And the story is changing. The surface of the sun, which seems uniform and eternal, is actually in motion. Giant cells of plasma rise and fall in slow tidal waves across its surface. Sunspots dark regions where magnetic fields tangle bloom and vanish over weeks. These are not random. They follow cycles. 11 years, on average, from quiet to storm and back again. But even these cycles are changing as the sun ages. What we are witnessing, if we learn to see through the light, is the slow, inevitable shifting of a star's heartbeat. The sun is halfway through its life, and like all middle-aged stars, it is changing, not fast enough to see, but fast enough that the future has already been set in motion. It will grow, it will burn brighter, it will become unstable, the balance will tip, and when that happens, the sun will no longer be the gentle guardian we once knew. It will become something else entirely, a force of extinction. a furnace with no mercy, a monument to the impermanence of all things. And we, its children, born from its light, will be forced to reckon with the truth we have avoided for so long, that even stars must die. And when ours does, it will not go quietly. Every star is born with a secret, a ticking clock buried in its core. It does not tick in seconds or years, but in reactions, in transformations, in pressure and flame. The moment a star ignites, its destiny is sealed not by fate, but by physics. It will shine, and in shining it will spend itself. That clock doesn't make noise, it doesn't announce itself, but it's always running. And the number that sets its rhythm, the single variable that defines how bright a star will burn and how long it will live, is mass. Mass is everything. Too little, and the star will never light. It will remain a cold lump of potential, drifting namelessly in the dark. Too much, and it will flare into existence with incredible violence, shining like a cosmic lighthouse before burning through its fuel in a mere few million years, ending in a supernova so powerful it can outshine an entire galaxy. But our sun? It was born in balance, not too massive, not too meager, just enough to last. A quiet star, a patient one, the kind that doesn't explode in its death but simmers, swells, and then fades into silence. This is the kind of star that nurtures life, that gives planets time to evolve, that burns with just enough restraint to allow oceans to form and forests to grow. This is why we exist. But that balance comes with a cost, because in choosing stability, the sun also chose a slow, inescapable end. Right now, at its core, hydrogen is being fused into helium. This is the sun's fuel, and it has been burning that fuel without pause for billions of years. Each second, 600 million tons of hydrogen disappear, transformed into light, warmth, and life. And though the sun is vast, its fuel is not infinite. Every sunrise, every golden afternoon, every moment of light on this planet is a subtraction, a payment, a cost we rarely consider. But the sun feels it. And when the hydrogen in the core runs low, and it will, that balance will break. The fusion will falter. Gravity will begin to win. The core will compress under its own weight. Temperatures will rise, and the sun will be forced to adapt. It will enter a new phase. It will search for new fuel. And in doing so, it will become something unrecognizable. We will not see this from Earth, at least. Not yet. These shifts begin deep within, long before they erupt across the surface. But make no mistake, the transformation will come. It always comes. And the irony is cruel. The very thing that makes the sun shine, the very reaction that gives us life, is what guarantees its death. It's easy to forget that stars have lifespans. They don't age like we do. They don't wrinkle or slow down, but they evolve, they change. They follow a trajectory that can be measured, predicted, mapped. The Hertzsprung Russell diagram, an astronomer's blueprint of stellar life, tells us this. It shows that stars like the sun spend most of their lives in the main sequence, a long era of steady fusion and stable light. But eventually, they must leave that line. They must drift upward and outward into instability. That's what awaits our sun, and when that moment comes, the transformation will not be subtle. It will not be quiet. The sun will expand. Its outer layers will begin to swell. The once small disk in our sky will become a monstrous orb, stretching across half the heavens. What was golden will turn red. The sun will become what astronomers call a red giant, an enormous, bloated, unstable version of its former self. And though this form may seem majestic from afar, it will be apocalyptic up close. The surface of the sun will cool as it expands, but the core will grow hotter and denser. New types of fusion will begin: helium into carbon, into oxygen, and with each new fuel, the sun will fight to delay the inevitable. But this fight will not last forever. The red giant phase is a star's last stand. The sun will become unstable, shedding its outer layers in great waves. Solar winds will intensify, radiation will spike, and storms will surge across its bloated surface. And then, one by one, the planets will begin to fall. It starts at the core, but it ends everywhere, and we will not be spared. Some astronomers debate the final moment. Will Earth be engulfed entirely, or will it be left just outside the reach of the expanding star, scorched and stripped but not consumed? The answer remains uncertain, but the outcome is the same. We will not survive. Whether the Earth is swallowed or merely seared, it will cease to be habitable long before the sun's final breath. Long before its surface reaches us, the growing heat will boil the oceans, melt the ice caps, and transform our skies into a blanket of steam. The atmosphere will choke on vapor, and life, every form of it, will vanish. Extinction will not come in a flash. It will arrive slowly, like a fever, like a tightening grip. And all the while, the sun will continue to burn, a red titan in the sky, a beacon of beauty, a promise of doom, and maybe, just maybe, if anything remains, if any fragment of civilization survives, someone will look up and understand. Understand that this was always coming, that stars are not gods, not eternal, not invincible, that even the giver of life has a limit, and when that limit comes, it doesn't ask for permission, it simply arrives, with fire, with silence, with inevitability. From where we stand now, the sky seems so still, the sun rises, the seasons turn, the weather shifts, but beneath that slow rhythm is a hidden acceleration. The change is already happening not as catastrophe, but as a quiet recalibration of heat, of brightness, of pressure. Each billion years, the sun grows roughly 10% more luminous. That may sound trivial, but over geological timescales, it is cataclysmic. We are passengers on a world orbiting a star that is slowly tightening its grip, not through explosion, not yet, but through warmth, through subtle, creeping radiation that deepens, decade by decade, century by century. And though our senses cannot register the shift, Earth feels it, not in sudden flashes, but in accumulated tension, the kind that breaks ecosystems, the kind that unwinds habitability like a slow, unspooling thread. The oceans will feel it first. They've been Earth's cradle for nearly 4 billion years. They cushioned the earliest flickers of life, carried the first cells, the first vertebrates, the first great migrations. They are the memory keepers of our planet, but they are also fragile, and they will not survive what is coming. As the sun's brightness intensifies, evaporation will outpace replenishment. Seas will breathe more water into the sky than they can hold. The atmosphere will grow thick with vapor, slowly transforming into a greenhouse that traps even more heat. It is a feedback loop, a chain reaction of warming, swelling, choking, boiling. What begins as climate drift will end in full atmospheric collapse. Rainforests will wither, rivers will shrink into scars, clouds will become heavy curtains of steam, and in time, the very air will betray us, no longer breathable, no longer hospitable. Carbon dioxide, once absorbed by oceans and forests, will linger, trapped, amplifying, turning the sky into a pressure cooker. Deserts will spread like a disease. Forests will ignite not in wildfires, but in flame sheets, walls of combustion, so vast they leave no ash behind. Crops will fail, seasons will lose meaning, the poles will melt, the last snows will fall. The earth will not explode, it will not shatter, it will simply become unlivable. And long before the sun engulfs it, Earth will already be a ghost. There will be no more blue, no more green, no more birdsong in the trees, or fish in the waves. The photosynthesis that once fed entire ecosystems will stall under thick clouds. Darkness by day, steam by night. The surface temperature will rise not by degrees but by orders of magnitude, enough to kill even the hardiest of extremophiles. Even the microbes that once thrived in boiling vents at the ocean floor will find themselves outmatched. The last life forms may cluster at the poles, or burrow underground, or cling to mountaintops like whispers, but not for long, not forever. Life will lose this planet before the sun ever touches it. And when that moment comes, it will not look like apocalypse. It will look like stillness, like silence, like a world forgotten by its own biology. Imagine standing in that future. No breeze, no birds, no scent of rain or soil, just a sky thick with steam, a sun that no longer glows golden, but glares white and harsh and merciless. Shadows will deepen, not because the sun is dimming, but because its light is sharpening. Edges will look etched in fire, mountains will shimmer like coals, grasslands will collapse into bare plains. The oceans, once vast mirrors of the sky, will hiss away drop by drop, not in one great flood, but in a slow, agonizing retreat, a farewell that takes centuries. Eventually, only a planetary carcass remains hot, dry, fractured, the atmosphere a poison, the soil lifeless. Earth will resemble Venus more than itself, shrouded in haze, wrapped in carbon, radiating death. And yet, above it all, the sun will still shine. That's the most haunting part. The light will continue, steady, pitiless. It won't mourn what's lost. It won't slow or dim. It will burn on, indifferent to the silence below. And it will grow larger, brighter, stranger. It will keep expanding as the hydrogen dwindles and the helium fuses. It will puff up like a dying flame gasping for more fuel. And when it begins its final inflation into the red giant it was always destined to become, it will not be sudden, it will be elegant, majestic, slow motion, obliteration on a stellar scale. The sun's outer layers will balloon outward. Its gravity will weaken as mass is lost. And that balance, the one that's held the planets in place for billions of years, will begin to falter. Mercury, the closest and most battered of worlds, will go first. Not in fire, but in friction. Its orbit will decay as it brushes against the sun's expanding atmosphere. Like a moth caught in a slow spiral toward the flame, it will be dragged inwards, boiled, vaporized, erased. Venus will follow, fighting for seconds longer. A planet already burning in a runaway greenhouse, it will face something worse, total absorption. But Earth will straddle the line between survival and obliteration. Some models say it will be consumed. Others say it will barely escape, left to circle the edge as a blackened husk. In the end, the distinction may not matter, because long before the sun swallows us, it will already have destroyed everything we ever were. Not in a scream, but in a silence so complete, it will feel less like death and more like forgetting. By the time Earth reaches its final chapter, there will be no forests left to burn, no oceans left to boil, no winds left to sing through trees. There will be no life to bear witness, no eyes to see the sky turn white. The world will already be unmade, long before the sun touches it. But the destruction will not stop there. As the sun swells, becoming a red giant, its outer layers will stretch farther into space. With each breath of helium fusion, its atmosphere expands like a slow explosion frozen in time. It will not burst. It will engulf. It will reach. It will claim. And Earth will sit in its path, awaiting judgment. Whether our planet is consumed or merely scorched depends on delicate balances, how much mass the sun loses as it expands, how Earth's orbit shifts in response. Some simulations say the Earth might barely survive, escaping the sun's surface by a cosmic breath. Others say we will spiral inward, pulled into the belly of the dying star like Mercury before us. But survival, in this context, is a cruel illusion. Even if Earth escapes the flame, it will not escape the heat. The atmosphere will be stripped, molecule by molecule, carried away by solar winds that now move like avalanches. What was once air will be lost to space. What was once ocean will have long since risen and vanished as vapor. The crust will crack open, the soil will glow, and the sun, filling nearly half the sky, will become not a light to live by, but a wall of fire pressing down from above. The last sunrise on Earth will not look like any that came before. It will not be golden. It will be crimson and endless. The sun will no longer rise and set. It will simply dominate, its glare stretching from one horizon to the other, until direction becomes meaningless. Day and night will dissolve into one long, punishing blaze. The sky will cease to be blue. It will become white-hot, then rust-red, then vanish behind a veil of boiling atmosphere. Cities, if any remain, will not decay. They will melt. Steel will buckle. Concrete will run like wax. Mountains will bleed molten rock. The bones of continents will fracture and flow. The Earth will become a world of magma seas and shattered land, its surface reshaped not by tectonics, but by radiation. Even the core of the planet will begin to stir. With the crust softened and broken, heat from the dying sun will reach deeper than ever before. The magnetic field will collapse. Solar radiation will sweep unchallenged across the surface, sterilizing every inch. And with no shield, no atmosphere, and no water, the planet will be bare naked to the fury of its parent star. There will be no farewell, no final broadcast, no voice from the ashes. Humanity, if it has not fled to another star by then, will be long gone, vanished not in a single moment, but in a slow exodus or a quiet extinction. Our monuments will not stand. Our stories will not echo. There will be nothing left to say that we were ever here. Just silence, just heat, just a world crumbling under the weight of light. And yet, even in that final collapse, Earth will still orbit, at least for a time. Charred, broken, stripped to its mantle, it will continue to circle the red giant sun until gravity drags it closer. Its orbit will tighten with each pass. Friction will steal its momentum. And eventually, inevitably, Earth will begin to fall. The descent will be slow, a spiral, a surrender. From a cosmic vantage, it would look like a dance. One last orbit, one last loop, then another, slightly closer, and another, until escape becomes impossible. And then impact. But the collision will not be thunderous. It will be silent. The surface of the planet will vaporize before it even touches the star. Rocks will turn to plasma. Elements will separate. Mountains will dissolve atom by atom. By the time Earth truly vanishes, it will have already ceased to be a world. No trace will remain. Not of its rivers or its cities. Not of its poets or its equations. Not of its art, its wars, its songs. All of it, everything that ever lived, everything that ever dreamed, will be swallowed in fire, its memory reduced to particles swept into the sun's ever-expanding skin. To observers from elsewhere in the galaxy, there will be no sign that a planet once shimmered here with oceans and life. No tombstone, no echo, just a slight flare, a small ripple in the sun's surface. And then, nothing. From that moment on, Earth will exist only in fragments, dust scattered through space by stellar winds, atoms of iron, calcium, silicon dispersed into the void, carried outward in the breath of a dying star. The same breath that once warmed us will now become our grave. Our ashes will join the sun's riding waves of charged particles, drifting into the darkness. And yet, in that destruction, something strange remains, a kind of beauty, because those ashes, they won't vanish. They'll join the interstellar medium. They'll mix with gas and dust from other stars long dead. And one day, perhaps, those atoms will gather again. They will collapse into a new star, a new system, a new world. And maybe, just maybe, something will live there. Maybe it will feel the warmth of its sun and believe, as we once did, that it will shine forever. Not knowing that forever is always borrowed. Not knowing that stars, like stories, must end. The greatest tragedies do not always scream. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they unfold in slow motion, so quietly that the end feels like a lullaby. And so it is with Earth's unraveling. There is no single moment of collapse, no sharp line between life and lifelessness. The fall is gradual, stretched across eons, and by the time we recognize the silence, it has already been here for a very long time. What begins with oceans boiling ends with rock melting. As the red giant sun grows, it sends not only light, but force waves of energy, particles, pressure, and plasma that batter what remains of Earth's atmosphere. If any trace of air still clings to the surface, it will be stripped away, torn off by solar wind, molecule by molecule, until the planet is bare. No clouds, no sky, no shield, just rock, exposed and burning. The ground we once called home, so solid, so dependable, will begin to ripple, not with earthquakes but with heat. The crust itself will soften, then sag, then run, like candle wax, like lava. Like memory being erased, mountains will glow faintly before they collapse. Valleys will become channels for liquid stone. The continents, shaped over billions of years by drifting plates and relentless erosion, will become nothing more than fluid geometry flowing, folding, flattening. The earth will turn red, then orange, then white hot, and through it all, there will be no sound, no wind to carry it, no air to hold it. Silence will reign, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening in a vacuum. Destruction without echo. From space, if any eye could still see it, Earth would look like a dying coal, glowing, pulsing, shedding its shape, its surface bubbling with magma seas, its former beauty lost beneath the shimmer of liquid rock. This is not apocalypse in the Hollywood sense. There is no meteor, no alien invasion, no final war. Just heat, just entropy, just the long, slow physics of death. And as the outer layers of the sun continue to swell, they will not just destroy by proximity, they will destroy by breath. The solar wind, now more like a hurricane of radiation, will scour the planet clean. Bits of Earth, atomized, lifted into space. Dust from the crust, from the mountains, from the bones of cities stripped, scattered, surrendered. The magnetic field, once born from the churning of Earth's iron core, will flicker and die. Without it, there is no protection from the solar storm, and without protection, there is no resistance. The solar wind becomes a sculptor. It does not create, but erases. And slowly, Earth becomes less a planet and more a memory in motion. Eventually, all that remains is a shell of glowing rock, and even that cannot endure, because the sun, in its dying grandeur, is not finished. It expands further. It pulses with instability. Its gravity weakens as it sheds mass, but its volume grows, and Earth, battered, burning, broken, finds itself dancing on the edge of annihilation. If it is not pulled inward, it may survive a little longer, spiraling just beyond the reach of the sun's swollen surface. But this survival is cosmetic. It will not be a reprieve, only a delay. The planet is already dead, already hollow, a tomb without a marker, a question without an answer. And as Earth continues its slow descent, whether it falls into the sun's fire or continues orbiting as a scorched cinder, its fate is sealed either way. It is no longer a world. It is no longer home. It is no longer Earth in any meaningful sense. It is wreckage. And even that will be brief, because the sun's outer layers are still moving, still stretching, still reaching. With each pulse, it exhales more of itself, layers of plasma and gas thrown into space. These are not gentle breaths. These are stellar convulsions, ejecting matter at speeds beyond comprehension. When one of these waves reaches the ruined Earth, it will not stop. It will not go around. It will go through, and what's left will crumble. Rocks will atomize. Dust will vanish. The final fragments will be swept into the stellar wind, joining the growing halo of material, expanding outward from the dying star. In that moment, Earth dissolves, not in flame, not in explosion, but in wind, in heat, in silence. And from a distance, perhaps from another star system, another world, another set of curious eyes, there will be no sign of what was lost, no flicker to say a planet once lived there, no burst of color, no sound, only a faint shimmer in the sun's halo, only a whisper of ash in the firelight. That's how our story ends, not with a bang, not with a scream, but with our atoms unbound, our minerals unwound, our oceans steamed and gone, our legacy reduced to particles drifting in the breath of a dying star. It is, perhaps, the most honest ending the cosmos can offer. Not cruel, not kind, just true, because the universe does not grieve. It does not mourn the passing of worlds, but neither does it forget. Those atoms, those ashes will go somewhere. They will mix with the galactic dust. They will settle in clouds. They will wait, and one day, perhaps, they will fall inward again, spiraling into a new sun, a new world, a new sky. And maybe, in that sky, another life will look up and wonder where it came from. And maybe, a part of it will remember us. The sun does not stop once Earth is gone. It doesn't grieve, doesn't pause, doesn't whisper a eulogy into the void. It simply continues expanding, exhaling, becoming less a star and more a storm. Its surface, once contained, now ripples like a boiling ocean. Its atmosphere spills outward into space, a great red tide washing over everything it once illuminated. And the first victim is already trembling. Mercury, the smallest planet, the closest to the fire, a world of rock and silence, battered and cratered, locked in an endless dance of scorching days and freezing nights. For billions of years, it has endured without complaint, no air, no water, no shield, just a front row seat to the heart of the solar system. But even Mercury has its limits. As the red giant sun swells, its outer layers reach farther into space, becoming a diffuse, fiery fog that stretches across millions of kilometers. It is not solid, it is not fast, but it is relentless. Mercury begins to brush against it. At first, it's subtle. The planet dips into the sun's extended atmosphere, with each orbit dragging its feet through the heat, losing speed, losing energy. The friction is faint, like fingertips skimming the edge of a flame, but over time, this contact becomes a spiral. Every revolution steals just a little more momentum. Every loop around the dying star is tighter than the last. And though Mercury has survived countless collisions in its long, silent history, it has never faced anything like this. It cannot escape. The spiral begins as a dance. It ends as a fall. The planet descends into the red storm, not in a flash, but in a slow-motion collapse. As it draws nearer, the light becomes unbearable. The surface begins to glow, craters soften, the rock itself starts to flow. Mercury is being melted from the outside in, cooked alive by a star that once only warmed it from afar. There is no explosion, no crater, no debris. Mercury simply dissolves. By the time it crosses the threshold, by the time it disappears into the roiling edge of the red giant, it is no longer a planet, just vapor, just elements, just echoes. And then it's gone. No trace, no orbit, no memory but the heat. One planet erased, and the silence after its passing is worse than the destruction itself, because now we know what's coming next. Venus. If Mercury was the sun's silent witness, Venus is its twin in torment, a planet almost Earth's size, once thought to be a sister world. But while Earth nurtured oceans and life, Venus became a furnace. Trapped under clouds of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid, its surface pressure strong enough to crush steel, its heat hot enough to melt lead, Venus is already a preview of Earth's worst-case scenario. But even Venus, in all its extremity, has not yet faced what's coming. As the sun grows, its atmosphere reaches farther still, licking at Venus's orbit, and the planet, already boiling, begins to burn, not just from sunlight, from proximity. The sky ignites. Winds that once circled the planet in a matter of days become hurricanes of flame. The atmosphere, thick and toxic, begins to tear apart, stripped layer by layer by the solar wind. Clouds become plasma. The surface, molten from within, begins to liquefy even further. Volcanoes erupt, but their fury is meaningless. They are swallowed before they can speak. The rocks, already past melting point, start to vaporize. Mountains collapse. Lava seas form and then vanish into mist. The entire planet is being unmade, not by a single blow, but by relentless radiation, by the sun's breath. It is a slow, operatic death, a symphony of heat. From afar, if anyone could still see it, Venus would brighten as it dies a flare in the sun's shadow. It would shine, briefly, as its atmosphere combusts and its surface reflects the final light of a world in surrender. And then, like Mercury, it's gone, not exploded, absorbed, two planets, erased, and still, the sun grows, still, it reaches, still, it consumes. Each world is a marker, a countdown, each loss a warning of what waits further out. And though Earth is already lost, already boiled, shattered, stripped its place in this sequence matters, because now, with Mercury and Venus gone, the sun's hunger turns toward the third planet's orbit. Ours. Maybe, in some futures, the Earth will still be there, circling as a blackened husk. Maybe not, but the red giant star is not finished. Its surface continues to heave and swell, unpredictable, unstable. Its outer layers pulse outward like tides. With every flare, it gains reach. And if the Earth remains, it will fall, just like the others, just like them all. The solar system, once a stable ballet of orbits and order, is unraveling. The rhythm that held for billions of years, planet after planet dancing around a golden flame, is now breaking, one orbit at a time. This is how the story ends, not with a bang, but with one planet, then another, until the silence becomes all that remains. And now, only 4 remain. Mercury, gone in silence. Venus, swallowed in fire. Earth, boiled, broken, forgotten. The inner solar system has become a graveyard without stones. Only Mars still lingers at the edge of the storm alone, red, waiting. For ages, we dreamed of Mars as our escape hatch, our second chance, a world we might terraform, colonize, call home when Earth grew tired. But now, there is no escape, no haven, no tomorrow. The red planet, once a beacon of possibility, now finds itself face to face with the red giant. And the irony is cruel. For so long, Mars was too cold, too distant from the sun. Its rivers dried, its atmosphere thinned, its core froze. It became a desert beneath a frozen sky. But now, that distance is vanishing. The sun's swollen surface, millions of kilometers wide, extends toward Mars with every breath. Its light no longer warms, it scorches. Its particles no longer graze, they slam. Mars begins to change. The polar ice caps water, and carbon dioxide sublimate into gas, then flee into space. The thin air evaporates molecule by molecule. The rocks, once rusted and frozen, begin to glow. The planet's iron-rich surface, so famous for its color, starts to shimmer with heat. Craters soften, dust becomes plasma, and for the first time in billions of years, Mars burns. But it is a different kind of fire. Not born from within like a volcano, but from above, from the sun's wrath, from the dying breath of a star that no longer remembers kindness. Still, Mars does not scream. There is no atmosphere left to carry sound, no air to catch a whisper, just heat, silence, dissolution. And then, like the others, it is gone, not all at once, but in layers. First the sky, then the surface, then the bones beneath, melted, stripped, lost. The solar system has become a peeling onion, each layer of planets consumed in sequence. And now, the inner shell is gone. The terrestrial worlds, those rocky spheres once thought stable, sacred, are erased. What's left? The giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, worlds of gas and clouds and pressure. They float farther out, seemingly beyond reach, and for a time, maybe centuries, maybe millennia, they remain untouched. But the red giant is still growing, still unstable, still shedding mass and swallowing space. And the giants are not safe. Jupiter is first, the great king, the planet that could have been a star, twice as massive as all the other planets combined, a world of storms and stripes, of moons and magnetic fields. Its size once protected the solar system, slinging comets away from Earth, holding the system's structure together with its gravity. But now, its strength becomes its downfall. As the sun's gravity weakens from mass loss, Jupiter's orbit begins to drift, not chaotically, but steadily, subtly. The giant feels its leash slacken. Its moons Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto begin to shift. Tides rise, resonances break. The harmony that ruled for billions of years is no longer sacred. Jupiter starts to fall inward, not into the sun, not yet, but toward instability. Its atmosphere begins to change. The outer layers puff up under solar radiation. The great red spot, that ancient storm, begins to lose shape. The stripes blur. The planet swells as heat seeps into its depths. And then, perhaps the unthinkable, the sun exhales a final, massive pulse, a surge of plasma, energy, and wind. And that wave reaches Jupiter. The planet's upper atmosphere is blown outward. Its hydrogen layers expand. Its moons scatter like seeds in the wind. The entire Jovian system becomes a cloud of chaos. Still, Jupiter clings to existence. Its core remains intact for now, but the balance is breaking. Saturn is next, the jewel of the system, the one with rings like poems carved in ice. The rings, delicate, ethereal, glorious, are the first to go. The sun's heat vaporizes the ice. The radiation charges the particles, and the dance of a billion frozen fragments ends in a silent shatter. Saturn weeps rings of steam. Then Saturn itself begins to unravel. Like Jupiter, its hydrogen envelope expands. The hexagonal storm at its pole fades. Its moons, too, drift away, some pulled toward the sun, others flung into deep space. The giants are dying, but not quickly. Their mass makes them stubborn. They resist the fire. But resistance is not survival. It is only delay. Eventually, even Uranus and Neptune, the ice giants, the distant sentinels, feel the heat. Their cold cores warm. Their methane clouds boil. Their colors fade. One by one, the outer worlds lose their form, not by falling into the sun, but by being blown apart, dissolved into space, erased by time and radiation and gravity undone. And through all of it, the sun glows, not golden, not life-giving, but vast, red, ancient, a star bleeding itself into space. It has swallowed everything it once birthed, and all that remains are echoes, dust, ghosts of orbits. The solar system is gone, only the star is left, and even that will not last. The solar system is silent now. No more planets, no more moons, no more orbits to trace or shadows to cast. The architecture of a once magnificent celestial clockwork has collapsed into nothingness. Dust, plasma, memory. Only the red giant remains, but even it is dying. Not suddenly, not spectacularly. Its final act is not an explosion. It is not a supernova. Our sun was never massive enough for that kind of drama. Instead, its death is slow, patient, and oddly beautiful, like an old monarch removing its crown. At the heart of the red giant, deep beneath the bloated surface and convulsing layers, a war has been raging for millions of years. Gravity pushing in, heat pushing out, hydrogen long gone, helium burning now, briefly fusing into carbon and oxygen, but the fuel is nearly spent. And when the helium runs out, there is nothing left to burn. Fusion, the miracle that kept the sun alive for 10 billion years, finally stops. The core, no longer buoyed by pressure, begins to collapse under its own weight. It shrinks, contracts, compresses, while the outer layers, no longer anchored by the core's energy, are blown outward in slow, spiraling waves. A final breath, a star exhaling itself into the cosmos. This is the moment where death becomes art. The expelled layers form a planetary nebula, a glowing shell of gas and plasma expanding into the void, rings of color, ripples of light, a cosmic iris staring into the darkness. From afar, it looks like a flower blooming in space, a last act of beauty. It will drift for tens of thousands of years, painting the black with soft, luminous color blue, green, pink, ultraviolet. But the painter is gone. At the center of the nebula, all that remains of the sun is a core, small, dense, white, hot, a white dwarf. This is the sun's final form, no larger than Earth, but with half the mass of its original star, a diamond of death. No fusion, no flame, no energy but the afterglow of collapse. It shines only because it is hot millions of degrees, born of compression, but it does not live, it does not burn. It simply glows, a cosmic ember, and around it, nothing. No Earth, no Mars, no Jupiter, no rings, no tides, no life, just the quiet remnant of a once living system. For billions of years, The white dwarf will remain a ghostly beacon in the night, slowly cooling, slowly fading, becoming dimmer with every million years that pass. One day, it too will vanish from sight, not by explosion or decay, but by temperature. It will become a black dwarf, a theoretical object that does not yet exist, because the universe is not old enough for any white dwarf to have cooled that long. But given time, it will. The sun, once a golden engine of life, will become a cold, invisible pebble in the dark. And that is the end, not of the universe, but of this chapter, of this star, of this family of planets, of our home. It is humbling to realize that stars do not rage against their death. They don't scream, don't cling. They go slowly, steadily, unraveling into silence. They become part of the backdrop, part of the dust. They return to the fabric. And so, the system that gave rise to oceans, mountains, music, thought, and love returns to the void from which it came, not in grief, but in balance. It is a cosmic truth as profound as it is cruel. Everything that burns must one day fade, even stars, even suns, even the light that made us. But before we move on, pause here. Let this sink in, that somewhere in the distant future, long after the last sunrise, after the last tree falls, after the last whisper of wind over stone, our sun will still be glowing, not with heat, but with memory, not with fire, but with the echo of all it once held, a white dwarf drifting alone, in silence, in space, in peace. The sun is gone, not exploded, not extinguished in fire, but quietly reduced to a white-hot core and a ghostly shell of colored gas, fading into the void. What once ruled the sky with majesty has been reduced to silence. The engine that sustained every breath on Earth now drifts without purpose, without planets, without orbiting witnesses. And yet, something remains. A relic, a monument. The white dwarf, our sun's corpse, hangs in the black like a cosmic tombstone, marking where light once lived. And around it, nothing. No more orbits, no more pool, no more system, only the long, slow death of heat. The white dwarf does not die quickly. It cools over trillions of years, longer than the universe has currently existed. In fact, every white dwarf that has ever formed is still glowing dimly. Yes, but glowing still. None has yet become a black dwarf, because not enough time has passed for such a transformation. But time is not loyal to what we can see. It marches forward without our permission. And eventually, given eons beyond imagination, the white dwarf will dim to absolute darkness. No light, no heat, no radiation, just matter, cold, still, forgotten. This is the black dwarf, a star that once lived, then died, then cooled into invisibility. An object so dark it cannot be detected, so cold it cannot be felt, so ancient it becomes myth. And here's the thing. In this deep future, the cosmic night has begun. Galaxies drift apart, stars extinguish, new ones stop forming, the lights go out, one by one across the heavens. The era of starlight, the brilliant chapter that made life possible, is over. This is called the degenerate era, a time when the universe is no longer bright, but filled with embers, a trillion black dwarfs, each a fossil of a star, scattered across a space so vast. Even gravity has begun to forget its grip. But the darkness is not empty. It's full of memory, because inside each black dwarf, atoms still vibrate ever so faintly. Each carries the imprint of fusion, the signature of pressure, the echo of fire. They are tombs, yes, but they are also time capsules. Encoded in their cores are the histories of the stars. They once were the rhythms of their lives, the tempo of their burn, the final flickers of their breath. And scattered among them, matter, leftovers, ashes of planets, cinders of moons, comet skeletons, broken rings, frozen, inert, drifting without destination. All the ingredients for life, but no spark to wake them. Even black holes begin to die. Over unimaginable timescales, they leak mass through Hawking radiation, slowly evaporating into nothing. Even entropy, that cosmic undertaker, begins to lose its grip as there's nothing left to rearrange. And so the universe settles. Still, silent, low energy, no contrast, no friction, no surprise, a sea of sameness. But here's the paradox. From the chaos of the Big Bang, the universe gave rise to stars. From stars to planets, from planets to life, from life to minds that could reflect, imagine, remember, and now, as the last stars fade, memory becomes the final light. The white dwarf that was once our sun may cool into darkness, but in this moment it still glows. It glows in us, in our stories, in our wonder, in the questions we ask, and the futures we imagine. Because to know that the sun will die is not just a scientific fact, it is a confrontation with meaning. It is the realization that nothing lasts, and yet everything matters. Because in the end, even as time stretches beyond comprehension, the moment we're in right now is the only place the universe is awake. You are the witness, the one who looks up and sees, the one who hears the silence and gives it voice, the one who remembers what it meant to stand in sunlight. And that may be the most extraordinary thing of all. The sun is still shining, outside your window, across your skin, into your eyes. It touches every blade of grass, every brick, every sea, every child's laugh caught in the wind. It's easy to forget this isn't normal, that this moment, this stretch of radiant, warm stability, isn't the default state of the universe. It's a miracle balanced on the edge of chaos, a golden pause in a cosmos otherwise governed by ice and silence, and it will not last. The knowledge that the sun will die isn't just a fact of astrophysics. It's a mirror, because if the sun, the very heart of our solar system, the giver of life, the keeper of time can perish, then so can everything else. So can we, and yet, somehow, knowing this doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it urgent. This knowledge doesn't hollow us out. It fills us with fire, with intention, with a pressure that says, don't waste this. Not this breath, not this hour, not this one shot. You get to be conscious under a living star. Because time is not a river, it's a fuse, and we are lit. Each day we wake, we are burning through it through sunlight given freely, through seconds we never earned. We are using up a gift with every blink, every heartbeat, every idle scroll, every silence not filled with purpose. And what do we do with it? Too often, we forget. We assume the sun will always rise. We assume we will always rise. But this isn't a promise, it's a loan. The sun does not owe us tomorrow. It is giving everything it has right now to hold this world together, to keep the atmosphere breathing, to keep the oceans from freezing, to keep the soil warm enough to grow food for a child who doesn't even know the word star yet. The sun's life is sacrifice, constant conversion, matter into light, light into time, time into life. And that life is you. So what will you do with it? Because when you realize that you live beneath a star in its golden hour, you stop treating your days like they're infinite. You stop waiting. You stop pretending that comfort is safety, that routine is forever, that you have more time to start later. There is no later. There is now. Now, while the sun still shines. Now, while the atoms in your body still hum with energy that was born in stellar fire. Now, while the universe still remembers how to make life from dust. You were forged in a chain of events so impossibly rare that it may never happen again in quite the same way. Not in this system, not in this slice of time, not in this body, with this voice and these questions. You are a singular echo of a dying star, and you are awake. So ask yourself, what is worth your sunlight? What is worthy of the time this star is bleeding just to keep you alive? What is worth burning for? Because that's what living island. It's burning with purpose before the night takes over. It's writing your name in fire, not so the cosmos remembers, but so you remember, so that when the last page turns and the light fades, you know you did not hide from the truth. You danced in it. You used it. You gave it shape. The sun will die, but while it lives, so can you. And so we arrive at the end, not just of the sun's story, but of the idea that anything truly lasts. All light fades, All warmth cools. Even the greatest fires become whispers. But maybe that's not the tragedy we think it, Island. Maybe that's the point. The sun does not ask for applause. It does not cling to its legacy or fear its twilight. It simply gives, burns, becomes, and in doing so, it teaches us without a single word what it means to live with purpose, to blaze with everything you have, even knowing you'll vanish, to give without guarantee, to illuminate others, knowing they may never know your name. Every tree, every breath, every hand that ever reached for another, it was all sun. We are the sun's children, not metaphorically, literally. The iron in your blood, forged in stars, the calcium in your bones, cooked in supernovae. The photons touching your face as you read these words, they left the sun 8 minutes ago. That warmth on your cheek, it's history arriving at light speed. We are made of sunlight, bound by time, and gifted with consciousness. Do you understand what that means? It means we are the universe, aware of itself, not forever, not flawlessly, but meaningfully, for a blink, for a breath, long enough to wonder why, to ask what's next, to stare into the abyss and say, I see you, I am not afraid. Because here is the great secret hidden beneath all the science, all the equations, all the spectral data and orbital decay charts. This isn't a story about stars dying. It's a story about light surviving, about awareness passing the torch, about meaning born in the margins of entropy. The sun will die, and we will die, but not everything ends. Stories don't end. They evolve, they echo, they move forward in minds and memories, in art and language, in dreams and daring. In you, you are the continuation of a process 13.8 billion years in the making. You are the fire that outlives the flame. You are what the sun made possible, and what it will never see. And perhaps that's the ultimate paradox. The sun made you, but you are the only one who can give the sun meaning, not by worship, but by wonder, by paying attention, by making your life a lighthouse for others lost in the dark, by remembering always that you are here not by right, but by radiance. So live with urgency, love with depth, build with courage, imagine with reckless awe, because the universe will not stay lit forever. But right now, it's island, and that is enough. That is everything. And you are the spark that remembers. What if the death of the sun isn't an end, but a transformation? What if stars, like stories, don't stop, they ripple? Not everything that disappears is gone. Not everything that fades has failed. The sun may collapse, its light may dim, but somewhere in the atoms it shed, in the particles it scattered across space, is the blueprint of rebirth. You see, in this universe, death is never wasted. When the sun dies, it won't just vanish, it will disperse. Its matter will be carried away into comets, into nebulae, into wandering clouds of gas that drift through the interstellar medium like silent caravans. And when gravity stirs again, when time permits a reunion, these fragments will coalesce, they'll spin, they'll compress, they'll ignite, and a new star will be born, different, but carrying within it trace memories of the old. This is cosmic resurrection, a phoenix not in mythology but in physics, a truth so beautiful it borders on the divine. The universe recycles its light, and not just in matter, but in meaning, because even if the earth is long gone, even if every record of humanity has turned to dust, the impact of consciousness doesn't simply vanish. It alters the waveform. It bends the arc. Like a tuning fork vibrating across a canyon, your awareness leaves a trace. The sun may not remember you, but the universe does. It remembers in probability fields, in quantum echos, in gravitational murmurs that shape the next generation of stars, the next chemistry of worlds, the next flicker of awareness in some future sky. We do not know what form it will take, but we know the rules. Energy changes, but it is never destroyed. So what if love is energy? What if memory is structure? What if awareness, yours, mine, ours, is a field that lingers longer than we think? Then the death of the sun is not annihilation. It is passage from the visible to the invisible, from particle to possibility, from one story to the next. And here's the most haunting question of all. What if we've already lived through this before? What if the atoms in your hands were once part of another sun, long dead, whose planets gave rise to life? What if the consciousness that animates you is a recycled spark, reborn in a new arrangement, wondering once again who it is and where it came from? We live in cycles far grander than we remember. We are not born from nothing. We are the afterglow of ancient things, the echo of a past too distant to name, the future of a universe that keeps dreaming long after its stars have burned away. So as the sun nears its end, don't mourn. Listen, there's a whisper in the cooling light, a promise buried in entropy. It says, "You are not alone. You are not the first. You will not be the last." Because even in darkness, the universe remembers how to begin again. What happens when the story keeps going, but the light does not? Imagine it. The last stars have burned out. The galaxies are cold skeletons of what once was. The black holes have finished their feast and slowly evaporated into whispers. No suns, no fire, no warmth, just a cosmos stretched thin, as silence coasting into nothing. This is not science fiction. This is the projected fate of our universe. A long, slow death called the heat death. Entropy wins. Energy spreads too thin to do work. Time keeps ticking, but there's nothing left to change. It sounds like a graveyard, but what if it's not? What if this quiet isn't death, but gestation? Consider this. We define life by heat, energy, motion. We define intelligence by sparks in the brain, electricity, light. But what if that's just our bias? What if consciousness isn't bound to warmth? What if awareness can evolve beyond biology, beyond atoms, beyond light, in a universe approaching absolute zero, where no neurons fire and no stars shine? Could information still flow? Could something, somewhere, still think? It's not just poetry. Theoretical physicists and philosophers alike ask this question. They imagine civilizations encoded in quantum fields, minds migrating into cold, stable particles, using black hole remnants or vacuum fluctuations to compute, not quickly, not vibrantly, but enduringly. A form of thought so slow, it's almost still, a whisper across eons, a single idea stretched across trillions of years. And what would such a mind contemplate? Not war, not status, not survival, but meaning. The universe, stripped bare of stars, becomes a mirror with no distractions, a perfect stage for the oldest question, why? And maybe, just maybe, that's the point of it all. Maybe the universe isn't about light. Maybe it's about learning. Maybe all the heat, all the chaos, all the galaxies were just catalysts, just scaffolding, just a furnace to forge something stranger, quieter, deeper, consciousness not as a side effect, but as a destination. And in that frozen future, where all movement slows, awareness becomes a kind of immortality, not in the way we hope, but in a way that transcends hope, a kind of being that no longer fears death because it has outlived endings. It doesn't mean you will live forever, but it means your story, the story of stars, of life, of thought, may be a chapter in something unimaginably vast, a spark that seeded the next fire. So if we are destined for darkness, let it be a sacred darkness. Let it be the kind of silence where new songs are composed. Let it be the void where gods are born, not from myth, but from memory. Because the universe doesn't mourn, it remembers. And sometimes, it waits. You've followed the light to its end, watched stars be born, watched them burn, watched them die. You've stood at the edge of a sun's final breath, and you've peered into the infinite quiet that follows. So now the question returns not to the sky, but to you. What will you do with the light you still carry? Because here's the truth, no supernova can answer for you. You are not here to last. You are here to ignite. That was never a curse. It was a calling. We forget that we live on borrowed light, sunlight woven into bone, into thought, into stories we pass like torches through generations. We pretend we are passengers on this planet, but we are not. We are flare-born, carved from heat and dust and improbable chemistry. trained by time to notice, to wonder, to care. We are the only beings so far as we know who can look at the stars and realize we came from that, and we are going back to it. Dust to dust, light to light, thought to silence perhaps, but maybe not, because what you do now matters. Every act of kindness, every moment of awe, every time you choose courage over fear, or creation over destruction, you tilt the universe in a direction that wasn't guaranteed. You change the signal, you ripple the fabric, maybe not across galaxies, but in one mind, one life, one future not yet born. And that's enough. The sun will one day die, but until that moment comes, it wakes you every morning with a silent promise. You still have time. Time to wonder, time to love, time to make your spark count. Because when the last fire fades and the curtain falls on this cosmic stage, the only thing that will echo through the dark is what we did with the light we had. And maybe, just maybe, on some far shore of eternity, something will remember. Not the equations, not the empires, but the wonder, the questions, the courage, the fragile, beautiful fact that in the vastness of space, in the darkness between stars, for a fleeting moment, we knew we were alive, and we looked up, and we burned bright, and we dared to ask, why?